what you can do is if you hold Option and you click on a nameplate, which will click all, okay? Just click on, hold Option, click on the nameplate so all of them are selected. We'll go to Window and go down to Color Palette. So Window, Color Palette. And then just go to, over here, when the Color Palette's open, see where it says Regions and Tracks? Just go to Tracks. And once you select Tracks, just hit None off to the right. It'll clear all the color from the track listings. So now we should all be kind of squared away here. Did you guys all get that?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, obviously, inversely, that means if you wanted to color code stuff based upon specific tracks, you could do it that way. This whole other listing here where it shows regions in tracks and regions in the region list and groups, all that information gives you the ability to color code things like the actual regions in the edit window, the items in the group, in the region list. So you could actually manipulate color coding there. For now, for starters, what I would like for you to do is to disengage the selection of all. So if you hold Option and click on the nameplate again so that no one is selected, we're going to go ahead and begin from here so that we can actually start setting up subgroups and subsystems. But first, we do need to make a few little changes so that we can kind of start from scratch on this. Jason, we're on the Goodbye Tonight Consolidated section. Let me know when you're in there. There is a version on the audio list you can pull if you didn't already have it on your hard drive.
Oh.
Here's what I want to do, okay? Just real quick. What I want to do is I want to make sure that we don't have any other submasters going on or submix elements going on. And a very easy way to find out is if we go to the track listing, what we're looking for are auxes, and auxes look like this little green arrow. You see that? So what we need to do is scan the list, make sure we don't have any green arrows other than that one. That one's just the snare verb. And technically we could get rid of the snare verb and start from scratch with that whole thing. I do want to point out though, while we're here and the verb is up, I do want to point out why there is a separate snare verb in the first place. And I'm going to jump over here to where the kick and snare really start rolling, but I want to point out why there's a snare verb separate from the regular verb in the first place. And that is, if you've never heard of this, I built in what's called an ambient verb. And an ambient verb essentially is a big verb with a lot of diffusion and a certain degree of decay that gets gated and shortened. So it's like a big verb that explodes all at once and then gets cut off real quick. So that's what the ambient verb does. So when you hear it, I'll show it to you with just a snare, essentially with the kick and the snare and stuff rolling, but that way you can hear exactly what's going on with it and see why it's a little different than just a normal verb. Oops. Alright, I'm just going to turn this up so you can hear it. You hear it? It's got a boxy sound, so you kind of hear it. But essentially, it just thickens out the degree of what's the real quick verb of it to kind of fill it out a little bit. A lot of times you will use an ambient verb on a snare because of that real fact is that it's gated to a point where it closes real quick. And what you can even do with it then, which a lot of people find that the fine tuning of what they want to do with that verb, but just to kind of show you what could be done with this is if you take that verb and then apply an EQ and then find the right frequency you'd like to emphasize, essentially you get the ability to kind of call out in a reverb format what frequency you want to ring. sparkle, but not like this one. It won't have to be that thick. This is just to kind of give a little bit of the snare a little bit more body back after it's tight. Anyway, what we're going to do with this though is we're going to go ahead and set this up in submix parameters so that we can utilize the submix features that are given to us. And what I want to do is I'm going to do a couple things. First of all, at this stage in the game, there is no master. And I want to have us generate a stereo master before we really get kicked off and started. So at the very beginning of the session, to the far left, if you click the first track where it says loop, then go ahead and hit Command-Shift-N and hit stereo master fader. And then once it's created, grab it and drag it all the way to the left. And you're going to want to bring this down to a certain degree so that it doesn't clip. Probably nice and somewhere in the yellow. Now what's going to happen is remembering that our plug-in is going to be the final dictator in how much volume is taking place, right? Now, typically, the way you want to do this in terms of processing is you do want to begin or build by creating some form of either compression or limiting at the master level first, so as you begin to build the stages below it, you would hear very clearly whether or not you would have over compression. So the first thing I'm actually going to do, well actually several things I'm going to do. First thing I'm going to do, and I'm just going to walk you through this whole thing, is I'm going to start here on the first insert track itself. And what I want to do is I want to go ahead and give this some spatial imaging from the get-go. So if you go to sound, multi-channel plugin, sound field, air stereo width. This is that widening in the pans. And all I want to do with this is take it to about 120%. Just a little bit wider than what it is. Now, you can adjust the delay and it gives you a bigger effect. The problem with it is it will begin to offset some timing. So we try not to mess with it too much. Because it'll make a big difference. It's just that it will make a big difference and it'll feel like it's shifted to one side or the other. Alright, once you're done with that, please go ahead and generate a EQ 7-band. And for now, we're not going to contour it at this point in time. We will make changes to it later. Okay? This point in time, we're going to leave it flat, but we want to have it active and ready to go. Now, we would apply dither at this stage if we were at our final. Do you guys remember my conversation with you guys about dither and when to really apply it?
Yep.
What was the conversation about?
You should only apply dither at mix down because you're going from 24 bit to 16.
Yes.
From higher to lower.
And my preference is to not do it on the first mix down bounce. I prefer to do it in mastering. Because if you bounce it at 24, you can always either master it in Pro Tools or master it in a third-party application. But you can bring it back into Pro Tools as a 24. And then once the 24 is done, once you brought it back in as a 24, you can dither it back down to a 16. The reason I prefer it at a high-res is because I always want a high-res version, a high-res stereo version of it before I dumb it down to a 16, preferably. Because you'll always, I mean, to be honest with you, it's just this. It'd be like 2012. Most cameras, not on phones, but most cameras, about a 10 megapixel, they go down to like, what, 16, 18, something crazy. If you were to decide that you wanted to keep your pictures so that you can show your kids someday, you probably want to keep your pictures not in the RAW from the way your camera outputs them, but in a JPEG form at the highest resolution that you can have it now, because 10, 20 years from now, that's going to look like a low resolution anyway. See what I'm saying? Whereas if you went to low resolution right away and you compressed it and just kept thumbnails that already look pixelated, a couple years later, 10, 20, it's going to look low res. Does that make sense? And because you may not, let's just say, especially if you Photoshop, your Photoshop might be outdated to make edits to later on down the road, easier to keep the final format in high res. Same thing with this is, this version of Pro Tools may never exist again, you know, where these plugins might be obsolete. I know because when I was a Pro Tools 6 user, and if you use Pro Tools 6 or before, all these plugins got updated. So any of your sessions from Pro Tools 6 or before are not usable in this form. I mean, you can open them, but all the plugins get wiped, which means anything that you were processing got knocked off, which means you can't open old mixes. It's not like you can open an old mix and go, oh, yeah, there it is. It's straight the way it was when I left it. Unfortunately, you can't. So it's good to do high-res bounces and never skip that process, just so you have a high-res bounce format to go back to. Does that make sense? Yeah. Just for safety's sake. I think it's very important. Anyway, so let's go ahead and go from here. We're not going to dither at this point in time. What I would like to do is go to Dynamics. Let's go ahead and break out the Bomb Factory BF76. I'm going to kind of show you what's up with this. And then we can kind of start building around it. The reason I don't want to kill, I preferably do not like the smack. I'll tell you why, and I'll show you why, if it helps. And I'm not a huge fan of the Maxim because it's kind of gritty. But the smack has a lot of high-end, it's a limiter, but it adds a lot of high-end frequencies as you limit more, and not the normal ones, very high-end, and it's kind of frustrating to deal with. What it eventually does is kills your EQ curve. You spent your whole day mixing, you spent your whole, an hour doing the finalized EQ curve, you throw a smack on it, all of a sudden you have high frequencies that didn't exist before. See what I'm saying? And it eventually degrades the overall output. So I prefer to use either the Bomb Factory or just the standard built-in compressor limiter. I'm going to show you how to use this one only because you'll learn more about it in 265 and some other classes, but this is something that I think is it's good to know. This is actually a limiter. You can see it says that there, peak limiter. You see the ratio, all that fun stuff. Well, what's interesting about it is it gets used technically as a compressor anytime it's below ratios that are underneath limiting ratios. A limiter has a ratio of at least 10 to 1, which means 12 and 20 work great in limiting. All I'm going to do, we can do 12 instead of killing it at 20. We're going to have a fairly moderate attack, so I'd like to go to the 2 spot. With our release, I probably want to bring that in at about 3. What we're going to do with this is by pushing the output, notice there's no threshold, but by pushing the output, we get more limiting essentially. And then by pushing the input, we get more limiting. The output essentially itself is just a makeup. Now, here's how I explain this. It sounds silly, and you might have heard this before from me. If I already had this conversation, I apologize. There's a series of limiters and compressors that do not show threshold values. And what the threshold value is it's essentially the difference between the input and the output. 2 ways to look at this that I like to think about, okay? Imagine, with me, if you can, okay? Imagine what it would be like I'll give you the dumb version, but let me give you the more not so dumb version. Imagine what it would be like to put more and more and more volume of water down a pipe that gets smaller and smaller. In terms of you're putting more in, but you're letting less out. More water in, less water out. What do you think will happen in terms of the water pressure?
It builds.
It builds. Essentially, that's how this operates. More you put in with less going out, the more it builds. The less you put in with more going out, obviously there's no build. Does that make sense? Another way I like to explain this in terms of how this gets used. Another way I like to explain this in terms of how this gets used is, well, a couple ways you can look at it. But let's just say, well, we're college kids, roughly. I'm not, but you guys are, and in that kind of age range, I don't know if you've ever had that experience where you try to fit as many people in one car as you can. But that happens sometimes. Sometimes by necessity, sometimes just for the hell of it, right? essentially what this acts as is if you look at the difference between how many you put in to how many you take out over time, obviously if you were ever compressed in a car by having too many people inside a car, you feel pretty smushed or compressed, right? Very limited per se. And that's essentially what this is more you put in without taking that much out, that much more compression is taking place, or that much more limiting is taking place based upon what the ratio is. Now, in my other classes, you'll hear this a lot, but I like to just give a shout out to this so you know what this means. Okay, so you hear this on the first get-go, from the top. There's three things that affect how much compression is taking place. Three major things, okay? One is where the threshold is. And where the threshold is on this unit is how much input is being driven compared to output. You don't actually see a threshold level in this situation. Number two is a higher ratio will yield more compression or limiting. Pretty solid there. The other thing is the attack. Specifically the attack, the release will also be a big factor, but the attack particularly because if the attack's too slow and something's happening quickly, it won't even compress it at all, or it won't even limit it at all.
And you said those are three things for what?
That will give you more, essentially more compression or limiting. Essentially the factors that are the variables that are utilized inside of compression and limiting. Yes, just
Why would you not have it set at fastest attack? Even if it's a sound that has a slower attack, and I mean it's so fast. But how would that even affect if you're putting it all the way to the beginning anyways? It's just gonna give the compression that it would give. Why would you even set it back? I don't get that.
That's a great question. The thing to think about with this kind of question is that ADSR, if you think attack, decay, sustain, and release, you understand those parameters, right? At the source, meaning in this version, in the edit window, okay? So let's just think of the waveforms in the edit window. There is an ADSR that's being applied. Compression comes in, and limiting, they come in and they affect the A, the D, the S, and the R by applying their values when the threshold is breached and when the threshold is again released. So attack is the time the clock starts when the threshold's breached, how long it takes to apply compression. Well, the problem with a too fast of a compressor, to be honest with you, too fast of compression will sometimes yield, if you're doing strong amounts of compression, will sometimes yield a clicking or an abnormal kind of sucking effect. And that abnormality can be felt across drums, will sometimes take on an extra clicking or an extra percussive feel because of how fast it's sucking in on it. And vocals will kind of just feel like they kind of just get smushed if it happens too quick, and it'll make it feel like you're doing this a lot. That is why typically you don't go completely all fast on everything, you go fairly close to all fast. Does that make sense? On a master specifically, you don't want to go too fast on a master compressor because if variables like kick and snare are ever left alone, because normally you think a mix of everything, right? But if there's a section where kick and snare are by themselves or something very percussive and short is by itself, on a master it will still tend to add that too quick of a movement in that kind of section. So you kind of need, to be honest, the dumbing down of that particular element keeps it from jumping so quickly that the processor itself makes noise. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The other element applied to the attack is that you can also make certain things a little less abrasive in terms of how they're compressed if the attack is not super strong. In that regard, you kind of have to look at what the graph would do in terms of the response on particular attack times. What it'll tend to do is if you shoot past the threshold, because there's the threshold that's breached and now there's a timing value that's given to the compression or the limiting. When that hits, if the value is a lower ratio per se, not a brick wall limiting kind of feature, then it will very discreetly return it to the value that it should have been in the output format. So it's really not a huge variable. But if the value is a brick wall limiter feature, it's going to be distinct in terms of the fact that when it hits, it then breaches and then it goes right to this level. And that's where that's why you wouldn't go moderate or slow too much on certain things. So that's kind of the opposite of the spectrum. So if you're trying to do a lot of limiting, your attack needs to be substantially fast enough to catch the items coming in. So you're kind of you're writing that system to kind of keep it in that balance between when it's essentially creating too much clicking or aggressiveness, and then when it's not aggressive enough and it's missing all the information.
Okay.
So it's that fine balance.
Right.
For drums, particularly like snare, things like that, anything that does move fairly quickly, you do end up riding a fine line in the attack system, mostly fast, but you're trying to get a variable in there that keeps it from sounding too overly percussive, even though it's already percussion. What you'll find when you go to mixing in 265 is that on the console on the SSL, there's two settings for attack. It's either moderate or it's fast. There is no slow. The moderate you'll find for kick works typically better than fast because on the kick it adds a little pep because of the reaction. So the compression will end up going pep, pep instead of boom, boom. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of being nice and rounded, it kind of gets that kind of weird kind of pecking sound. And again, that's just a feature of the timing of it, that it just needs a little bit of reactive time. Now here's the thing about that. Most compressors and limiters have some sort of look-ahead feature that will analyze the information just milliseconds before it comes in. So even with the attack set to a certain speed, it already knows or analyzes the data before it gets there. So when you set your attack, it will usually typically also have to keep or focus in on something that this doesn't have with hardening softening, which you see in a lot of devices. And that hardening softening on a softening feature will look ahead and round it into its compression, even if the attack is slow. What it'll do is, if the audio makes its entrance, as it's breaching the threshold, even though, let's say the audio is playing and it just starts to breach its threshold, what it'll do is it'll start to bend it. Instead of letting it just go, it'll bend it even before it breaches the threshold, so that when it does breach the threshold, it's just got this, well, so you can see it, it's got this over kind of encompassing arc that levels out into compression. So essentially, again, we're rounding. Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, and it's just trying to smooth it out.
I never just thought about it that way. I like it.
Yeah, well, I mean, the cool part.
Just think about the meaning and what it's actually doing.
Yes. What's crazy about it is that you'll find that the reason that the SSL is so great at what it does is because when you get beyond just the functions, you realize that some compressors are just fantastically better at doing that accurately every time the way that you want it. Some compressors are just like, they say that they're doing, and it's like when they made these the first time, when it was early on in plugin stages, people were looking at it going, when I turn this knob, is it doing what it's supposed to be doing? You see what I'm saying? And so you're going to find that there's some equipment that's out there that's just like phenomenal, like you just night and day difference. You put this on anything, compression or limiting, you put this on anything, and it makes it sound golden. You know what I mean? So that's what's really cool. The plugins are kind of hit and miss sometimes, but great question. Great question. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and show you this. Essentially how this is working, what it's doing. Now I do want to mention this. Metering on this side, it's just showing gain reduction. If you go to this -18 and -24, this is output volume. So with gain reduction, you'll actually see how much reduction is taking place. So all the needle movement that you see is how much compression it's holding back. Now I'm not going to begin by driving it because I want to, technically I want to give it a little bit of room so I can. So what you're seeing in the needle movement is how much in terms of dB is being reduced. on the overall, we really gotta make it very light and subtle because of what just happened. I don't know if you guys just noticed what just happened. Watch the meter. It's just because of balance at this point in time. We'll fix it. Watch what it does in terms of reduction. How much reduction do we have right now?
-2
Sorry, I'll zoom in. Watch what happens when the drums come in. Yeah, you know who's responsible for this?
Bass guitar.
The low end. Remembering that the frequencies that are being used or manipulated are very, very specific. Even though this meter only shows one output, it's not taking into account what's going on frequency-wise. So all I'm going to do for now, in order to just kind of give us an overall balance, is I'm not going to kill us with this. I'm just going to back this off a touch, bring this up enough to get our final output. And then I'm going to have to go through a bounce and fade out. Now, I'm going to go ahead and leave this at a fairly moderate level. And all I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and create my submixes. Okay? So this is what I would like for you to do. I'm going to go ahead and build in certain submixes, and I'm going to write them up on the board so you can kind of see what they are. Let's see. I see drums. I'm going to do drums. All you need to do in Pro Tools 9 fantastically to do this, which is easy. Oh, let me point this out. Submixes will get routed out of the output. Got me there?
Yes, sir.
Huge, okay? We're not bussing. Even though we will use bus numbers, we're not bussing off the sends in that regard. So we're not doing it as an aux send kind of bus. We will use aux inputs, but it has to get routed out the output. Because if we don't do it that way, then we'll have duplicates of the sound. We only want one version of the sound, has to be submixed to a stereo aux track.
So when we send it out of the output of the track,
Yes.
not a send.
Yes, and exactly. So let's do this. This is how this will run down. This is an easy process, but you have to know how to do it so that you get it right. I'm going to pick the first track on the kick, and I'm going to leave out for now. I'm going to leave out this loop stuff. It'll be fine by itself for now because it's just going to do its own thing. And I could even do a submix for the loop, but I don't really care about it that much right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a grouping from the kick to the overhead right. And I want you to hold shift. So click kick, hold shift, click overhead right. You guys get that? So that nameplate series is highlighted. Now what I want to do is I want to do this routing just to this group. Do you guys remember the hotkey pattern for this?
Option? Option button?
Shift option. So if you hold shift plus option, I want you to go to the output. You're going to do this. On the output. Well, let me zoom in so you can see.
Not that one. The next one.
Oh, it's okay. I got it. I just was trying to get the zoom thing to work. So all I'm going to do is go shift, option, and hit the output. And that output, I'm going to go to new track. New track. Then I want this to be a stereo aux input. Let's deselect create next to current track because if you click your first one, it's going to drop it right here. If we don't, it should by default drop it over here. We're going to title this Drum Master. Sometimes I literally just do this. Drum Giant M. Because that's how I know. But it's going to be a submaster, so. And it should have just put it right here. And it should have routed all those to there. So you'll know if you push play, and when your drums come in, you'll know what happens. Okay, now, in working with this, I do want to mention a couple things. So it doesn't kill you guys. I do want to mention a couple things. Solo safe. You guys remember the hotkey to do solo safe? We did this
So let's see.
once. Raise your hand if you know what solo safe is. If you guys remember this, we did talk about this, but it's probably been a little while. Yes, sir. Go for it. No, go for it.
Solo safe is when you solo save something, it's safe from solo. Like if you wanted to solo the drums, it'll keep whatever you have solo safe. You'll still be able to hear it.
Bingo. Jason, why would that be important?
That would be important because if you're dealing with a lot of tracks and you need to have your snare and kick in there just to give you an idea of what part of the song you're in, and you're messing with other tracks on solo separate from the rest of the song, you can do that very easily without having to worry too much about exactly what solo all the time.
Well, and two more, and that's good. That's good. Two more things to add to that are probably a little more important. I mean, placement in song, huge. But you'll use it more often for submasters because every time you want to solo the snare, you're going to get really frustrated if every time you hit solo on the snare, you hear nothing. Because if that master's not activated, just remember when we do this aux thing in this output form, if you solo this by itself, this disengages, and because this is routed through here, you'll hear nothing. So you want to solo safe this, so if you solo any one of these, this will still send you information, you'll hear it. That's number one. Number two is if you had something like this, a verb, and when you solo the snare, you want to always hear it with the verb. Usually you do, because you want to hear what the sound is like overall. So you don't want to kill the verb. A great example would be verb for vocals. If you want to solo some vocals, but you still want to hear the verb, you just solo safe. You remember how to do it. It's Option, click on the S. So all you're going to do, it's Command, click on the S. That was my bad. It's Command, click on the S. So if you Command, click on the S, you'll see it gray out. That'll solo safe that. So now when you solo this, anytime you solo this, you'll actually have that set up that way. So when the drums come in, I'll be able to solo through any particular tracks I want. Did you hit the command and on the S on the master? Hold the command. And then click on the S on the Yeah, just that one. No, you don't have to click there, just click that. There you go. Yeah. Oh, no worries. Okay, so you see how this works, right? Okay, now here's what I want to mention. While we're here, let's go ahead and build our drum group. Except we need to disengage this, okay? Our drum group won't include the master because if we make any automation points or make any changes to the group, we don't want to change the master because for the most part we want to keep this the same. One reason we might want to use drum groups. Soloing, great reason. Soloing, we could do in the reverse order, where we solo safe all of these, so that way anytime we hit the solo on the master, we hear the whole thing. Problem with it is if we solo safe all of them, then there's no way to solo in between them, if they're all solo safe. So an easier way to do this is let's go ahead and group them. So let's shift and unclick this. If you just go back on the overhead right, if you hold shift and go back to overhead right, it'll deselect it. So make sure your drum master's not selected anymore.
Overhead right?
What's that?
What's overhead right?
OHR.
What do you mean? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. OHR. Yeah, sorry. You're good, right?
Yeah.
Bobby, you're good.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. So we're just going to hit Command G. And this is our group one. So we can call this kit or drums, whatever you want. Kit, drums, any one of those things. All right, what you're going to do is in this, see where it says type and it says edit or mix, and then it says mix and edit? We probably want to keep it at mix and edit. See then where it says follow globals. What that means is if you go to the global section, switch to the global tab. I apologize, I just had eye surgery last week, the week before. My eyes are killing me. Okay. Globals, you guys here?
Yeah.
All right. Guess what all this stuff means?
That means.
Go, Steve.
Okay, that means that's the operations that's going to be followed. Like, those are what you can control in that group.
Yes. As a group.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what he's basically saying is, depending on which ones of these I pick, these are the ones that are going to be active in the group. So if I pick just one of the tracks in the group and I make adjustments to send A level, if I have a send A on all of them, it'll do it to all of them. Now this is another HT feature that did not exist in the original LE version. And in 7, they started incorporating more of it. In 8, there was more. There's even more in this one than there was in the previous versions. And it just looks like now you can a la carte. It used to not be like this. It used to be, oh, it's just the main, it's just the whole send, or all the sends and not individual sends. But then this fantastic how this is written up. So you could have sends, A through E, which is your first bank, all follow each other. And you could have sends F through J be independent of each other, if you wanted to. Might be a cool way to do it, that way you can keep categorized. But you can see how these break down. Panners are not included at this point, unless you select them. LFE, which we won't be using because we're not doing surround sound, but if we were, we could have that operable from there. But I want to point out something. If you select follow globals, it will take this global thing. But this global is essentially everybody's doing this if you apply it to follow globals, which is fine. You just essentially want to have all this dialed in. Now, I personally prefer, and if you just select option, you can get everything activated. I prefer, to be honest with you, I prefer to have them all, if they're grouped, I prefer to have it all set up so that it all works and hit it follow globals. Now notice if you go to attributes, if you have follow globals disengaged, attributes is just specific to the group. Follow globals, if you make another group, when we make another group, you'll see this. When we make our next group, you'll see that the globals will stay the same. Every group now has this as their global pane. The only way that we make them active for each group is if we hit follow globals. Otherwise, each group gets its own page independently, and that's what the attributes one is. And what's cool about this is you could save it. You could save 2 settings for this just between these two. But notice down here, you get 6 settings of variables that you can actually save to each of these hot buttons at the bottom that say, oh, button 1 is this configuration, and if I change it, select a different pattern, I can save that as button 2, and then I can switch between them at any time when I open up. All I have to do is open up this page, and instead of saying create group, I just hit edit group, switch it, hit OK, if I want to just hop back and forth. Now, I'll tell you, to be honest, I don't use this that much. You may use this if you're doing certain purposes. You might actually use this in mixdown if you're doing stuff for film, if the groups are doing something very intricate, where you need these groups to do this for this setting, but the next time when you get into this portion, you need these groups to do that. It's actually much easier to just, for me, I just activate them all, because most of the time, if I want them to be independent, all I have to do is write it in the automation or temporarily disengage it. And that's really easy to do. Do you guys remember well, let me do this and then I'll ask it and I'll close it. So let's just say follow globals and we'll do everything in the globals pane, okay? You have that so far?
Yeah.
Okay, and then it's going to have an ID that's going to be assigned to it, and you'll hit OK. It'll be given a color. Now here's the question. How do I temporarily break the group without disengaging the group? Temporarily make a move in the group to one thing without disengaging the group. You guys remember how to do this?
Without disengaging the group? Nope. Alright,
all it is control. You hold control. Well, here, this is without control, okay? No control, right? If I hit control, this is control.
Okay.
Is it where you put it? So
Yep.
like control?
Yeah, until you let go of control. Same thing works for the sends. It works the same way for the send levels, the send mute, all those operations if you hold control. Just temporarily breaks the group. And believe me, this is huge because I remember when I was at your station, I started working with groups, and I was like, gosh, it's so frustrating to work with groups because if you want a group, then it always does everything, and you can't get it to not do anything unless you disable the group. Does that make sense? You're always constantly backward. Control is a quick fix for that. Now,
Is that only Pro Tools 9?
no, that's actually been, I think that was Pro Tools 6. Or even, it might have even been before. I don't, to be honest with you,
We got that early.
yeah, I don't even remember Pro Tools 5. I mean, Pro Tools 5 is what I learned on, but I don't even remember. And what's funny is you go back and look at them and you're like, oh my gosh, this is old. And you're just surprised, because back then it looked new, you know what I mean? Anyway, all right, now, get it? So we're mastered, we're solo saved. So we have our submix, we have our solo save, we have our grouping. Now what we can begin to do with this is we can begin on our master, we can begin to apply an overall compressor and an overall EQ. Now we could use, at this stage in the game, there's a couple things we can do. If we equalize before the compressor, there's two ways to do this. If we EQ before the compressor, what do you think will happen?
It's gonna change the level. It's gonna change the way the compressor activates. Right?
Yes. Right on the money. Let's say we did this whole EQ curve and we just balanced it out where we swooped out all these low mids. Let's say we cut a lot of low mid and then we cut a lot of maybe a little bit of the high range. What it's going to look like to the compressor doesn't care who got cut. They only care about who's loudest, because who the first person is to reach the threshold is the person that gets focused on first on the compressor. Does that make sense? So if the mid frequencies are the things that are dominating, they'll eventually they'll be leveled out essentially by the compressor, because every time those peak frequencies hit, they'll get slammed down. So it's good and bad. There's good and bad to doing it. I'll give you two reasons why you might want to EQ before compression. One is, if something is unbalanced and it's unevenly hitting the compressor, and it's in a specific frequency, you can cut it out so that it more evenly applies to the compression. Does that make sense? So if there is something sticking out that is hitting the compressor too early, you can EQ it out. Other than that, most compressors that you'll find in Pro Tools have their own filtering section, so you don't even need a separate EQ to do certain things, like the low end. Sometimes you don't want compressed as much, so you can just filter that part out so the low end kind of passes through a little bit. Now, and that's on an activation level, so that you're trying to keep the low end from being the dominant activator of the compressor. So that's that. If we EQ post compression, we get the ability to EQ what happens after compression and essentially counteract any things that may have negatively taken place because of compression, or any things that we may need to bring back out from compression. The downside is to EQing after compression is that, unfortunately, EQs have a very low tolerance for gain. So if we compress, push the makeup gain too hard, back into the EQ, we could clip the EQ and essentially make pops, clicks, and distortion. So that's a downside, really. But it is nice to have control on the other side of it. I prefer, to be honest, I prefer using a little bit of both for certain instances. But if I had it only one way, I would physically only have it in post compression, personally. And at odds on, you'll see it on the SSL. It's inline post. So it goes compression, EQ. Does that make sense? So let's look at this. I'm gonna go ahead and build. For now. I'm just gonna build the standard multi-channel plugin, dynamics, compressor limiter. Nothing too severe, but this has nice parameters, and I'll show you why. I'm gonna go ahead and highlight. And if you guys hopefully should know this by now. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to options. And I'm going to make sure I have it set to loop playback. Loop playback is fantastic for things like this, so we can just let it run and run and run. And then all we have to do is in the edit window, we'll highlight a small section of the drums. So I highlighted a couple bars of the drums, and I'll just let it run. Let it keep running as I work with this. And with loop playback on, it'll just keep feeding me info. It's okay. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to make some specific adjustments. Now, of course, attack does have to go, for the most part, fairly fast. Release can probably stay somewhere in this moderate section. For my overall drum kit, I may want to push my ratio to about 5 to 6 to 1, somewhere in there, but I'm probably going to fine tune it. Now, here's the thing that I mentioned. We don't go super in depth at this level, but we will eventually at 265, which is one of my favorite courses to teach this in. But another thing is I like to just emphasize this because you're going to hear it over and over and again, and it's good to be comfortable with what it is. Compression. The amount of compression that gets delivered is still based upon the three things that I was telling you. The ratio, the threshold, and specifically the attack. Now with that in mind, having a high ratio does not deliver a lot of compression if the threshold is barely even met. Does that make sense? If the threshold's barely met, it's not a lot of compression. But once the threshold starts to get met, and if it's met a lot, it's a lot of compression. On a 2 to 1, on a ratio of 2 to 1, what the ratio means is for every 2 dB past the threshold, it'll only let 1 pass. Or if I did a 4 to 1, for every 4 dB past the threshold, it'll only let 1 pass after compression. So you see what I'm saying? So where I'm going with this? Well, on a 2 to 1, that's not a lot of compression. That's only half the values. But on a 2 to 1, if I notice the difference. On a 2 to 1, if I let 10 dB pass the threshold, how much do I get in the final output on the 2 to 1? 5, right? Because it's just half, right? For every 2 I push through the threshold, I get 1 out, right? So I put 10 through, I got 5 out. What's the gain reduction? How much gain reduction just took place? It's how much you lost. How much did I lose? 5, right? Okay, now let's think about that. In that scenario, on a 2 to 1, I just lost 5 dB. Hold on to that thought. Let's take my ratio up to 4 to 1. Okay? 4 to 1. 4 to 1, let's breach the threshold by 1 dB. What's my final output? A little bit of math here. Say it again?
Or is it the topic?
It's not gonna affect it.
No, it will. If I go past it 1, all I have to do is breach the threshold.
Okay.
On a 4 to 1, if I breach the threshold only by 1, what's my output? Almost. Oh, no, it goes smaller. If for every 4 that go through, I get 1. So for every 1 that went through, I have to divide it by 4, which equals what? Royce, do you know?
0.25.
0.25, right?
Yeah.
That was on a 4 to 1. That's on a 4 to 1. That's a higher ratio than 2 to 1, right? Is a 4 to 1 higher ratio than 2 to 1?
Yeah.
Yes. But because I only breached the threshold in the second scenario by 1 dB, my gain reduction, my output is 0.25, meaning what got lost, what got compressed. My gain reduction is 0.75 dB. In the first scenario, my gain reduction was 5 dB. Who had more compression? 5 dB gain reduction, 0.75 gain reduction. Who had more compression?
0.75.
Actually, no.
5?
Yes, because it's all, gain reduction is the how much compression, essentially. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So even though I had a lower ratio, because I had a lower threshold with more going through it, I have more compression. Do you see the difference?
Yeah.
That is where it gets kind of confused, because most people think, well, more compression, or more higher ratio, more compression. Not entirely true. Because if you don't push the threshold hard enough, you still get less. This is why compression is this kind of weird thing. Because the difference in the variable between an amount of compression, if I have a high, let's say I have a high, or moderate, let's say I have a 5 to 1 ratio, okay? So I'm in between. I'm halfway to limiting, okay? 5 to 1 ratio. And I push a good level past the threshold. So I have a good amount of compression. There's still a way to have a good amount of compression, or even if I was trying to get a 5 dB gain reduction. Another way to get a 5 dB gain reduction is to, let's see, I had a 5 dB gain reduction on a 2 to 1 when I passed it by 10, right? So if I do a 5 to 1, okay, follow me on this, how do I get a 5 dB gain reduction? How much past the threshold do I need on a 5 to 1? You just do the math. For every 5, I get 1, and I want to have a gain reduction of 5.
So it would be 25, right?
And that's this is kind of where it runs into this thing where you're seeing now the balance between how much compression is a balance between ratio and threshold, and we didn't even talk about attack because how fast it uses it also changes the ratio at certain instances in time because of how quickly it gets there. A good example on a 4 to 1, as soon as it reaches the threshold, from the moment it starts to compress to the moment it fully compresses, from the moment the attack time clock starts to the time it fully compresses, fully compression is 4 to 1. Start of it is 1 to 1 because it hasn't done it yet. So guess what the ratio is in the in-between? Halfway there.
I did not
Okay. But essentially what I'm trying to say is attack also has to do with how much compression. Let's say this is in micro seconds just below this millisecond point. But let's say we set it to 1. Oh, that's 1.8. We set it to 1 millisecond. Let's set it here. Okay? 1 millisecond. Let's think about this. If it takes 1 millisecond to apply a 5 to 1 ratio, or let's do a 4 to 1 because it's easy to do the math. If it takes 1 full millisecond to apply a 4 to 1 ratio, then what happens at half of a millisecond?
It's a 2 to 1 ratio.
Bingo. So what you see here is attack time will change the ratio over a course of time on its way to the finalization of once it fulfills its full ratio. On the in-betweens, it's halfway in between. You go to the quarter point, it's a quarter point in between. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that essentially affects it. So that's why compression and limiting is such a foreign thing in terms of grasping the full concept, because there's more than one way to get the same amount of gain reduction. There's more than one way to get the same amount of compression. That's kind of weird, but there is. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But all in all, there's very simple ways to get the results that you want if you understand what the numbers mean. As long as you understand what the numbers mean and the meters are doing, very simple ways to get to where you're going. I'm going to begin, I'm going to put this back. So I'm going to fairly fast attack, moderate release. I'm not going to worry about the knee for now. I'll show you the knee and I'll kind of put it into a moderate place. But the reason I won't really worry about the knee is because the knee gets, and this has a knee adjustment. Some other devices don't because the knee gets automatically adjusted by the ratio. But let's just think, watch as I change the ratio. You see what's happening in that graph?
The knee bends.
Yeah, essentially. This lighter the ratio, the softer the knee, the harder the ratio, the harder the knee. As soon as I get up into limiting, it's a pretty hard knee. You see that? Now, without a knee control, this physically changes the knee on its own. With the added knee control, watch what happens. It just essentially picks it up before the time. See how it's doing it before the yellow line? The yellow line represents the threshold.
Yeah.
It starts to soften it out way before it starts. So that essentially you do get that rounded feel. For now, I might just start here. I'm going to listen to it and see what I think, though. First of all, I will say this. The compressor, this particular compressor limiter in Pro Tools by default has 2 problems by default when it opens up immediately. One problem is the attack speed's way too slow on a default. 99% of the time you're going to have to move to the left on the attack. Because by default it starts in a straight up position. That's one problem. Problem 2, by default the threshold starts at negative 24 dB. Did you see how much gain reduction was already coming through? The threshold's already way too low. So we have to set the threshold. We're going to set the threshold. We made an ideal ratio. Let's move this threshold. We don't want this much gain reduction. It's way too much. But I do want to point out a few things. These filters over here in the side chain will allow us to filter out certain things that are being manipulated. And if we want to not have the low frequency manipulate the compressor, we can hit N and we can filter past the low frequency position. Notice you don't see the kick representing as much information gain reduction. If I take it back out, EQ on the kit right now, so it's not really counting for much, but if we go to the mix, from what I hear, I could use more kick. A little less happy. You'll hear a little bit of clicking and popping as you go. Now, once we have that mostly dialed in, we can begin to apply an EQ 7-band, and that 7-band will allow us to manipulate things on the overall level. If we want more highs, right? If we want more mid, if we want a little more lows.
Why when you turn the low up that high, it seems to take out the highs?
What it is, the reason why is because it's activating our overall master compressor. So what we need to do is with our master compression is we need to back down some of the threshold a little bit because it's pushing it too hard. And you kind of do have to watch out for that because it's essentially every time it's kicking, it's making the compressor go back down. So you kind of have to watch out for it because by doing so, you end up with this possibility of, because it's compressing everybody, it's activating a particular device. You just kind of have to watch out who it's activating. We actually may need to bring it down a touch. Let's see, there we go. Now this is normally how I would prefer to do this. Pull out a little bit of the, right before we're about to hit the low end. I do apologize, these speakers don't really carry it through down here, what's going on here. And then we have to find the sweet spot where we're not clicking on here anymore. There is a little bit of a weird spot right here. Alright, so all I was doing was kind of giving this high point a little bit of more subtlety. That hat's kind of being a little abrasive, so I just pulled a little bit of it out and give it a little more crispiness towards the top. All I want you to do now is I'm going to write a list for you. You're going to go ahead and do your grouping, so you'll be able to group the particular items like the guitars. You'll see there's a lot of different guitars going on. You'll see there's these string parts, violin, viola. Let's see, violins over. Oh, it looks like it ends right here. So there'll be a violin and a viola part. There were, oh, this is the consolidated version. This is consolidated from its original format. I actually had a large amount of background vocals on this before, and I dumped them down because it was just too much. So let's see. Lead vocal. Okay. All right, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have you split these up, and I'll write which ones are which. You're actually going to want to listen to them. At the chorus, if you go to the chorus, a good way to do this is if we go to the chorus, there's a whole host of guitars that are taking place here, most of which kind of carry two different types of tones, and I'll show them to you. If we look at the guitars starting after the AC, these are the acoustic guitars, and after the lead, this is the one that does the opening line, but once we start here, let's look at these. I just want to show them to you so you can see what the differences are. I'm going to turn them down just a touch so that they don't kill us. And based upon the differences, you're going to want to group these and submaster these with guitars that sound alike. So let's listen to these. All right, so this is a pair. This is the next pair. All right, so here's where the difference starts. See where it says slide? Did you hear the difference between these two? Compared to this. And the way they're built, the way I originally built these when we recorded these is I built a brighter side to the guitar and a thicker, chunkier side to the guitar, so when they all get played together, they're kind of a place to be. So all together, they fill out fairly nicely to each other when they're all on. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to submaster guitar 1, left, right, 2, left, right, so that this is all in a group. And then the next set of guitars will be all in a group. And you can include the D guitar because I'm pretty sure that still ends up being part of that grouping. So if you click them, shift option them out of the output, you go ahead and build a new track in stereo. You can just call this guitar 1 giant M and hit create. And essentially you'll have the ability to make, preferably on this, an EQ curve first so you can build the overall sound you're trying to go for before you bother any of it with compression. So essentially if we play this and listen to it, I'm just going to solo save this real quick. We can begin to build the curve. I can hear a lot of nasal focus, and I want to try to pull it out a little bit. Hear the difference? I just took out a little bit of some of the annoying part here, gave it a little more low end body, a little bit of brightness up top. Now when I go and compare this to my friend over here, do the same thing over here with this guy. Out of the output, I go ahead and go new track, call this guitar 2 master, and jump over here, solo save this, unsolo these, and I'll end up making a group out of the guitar 1. Group, follow globals, guitar 1, yes. S guitar to D guitar, group, guitar 2, follow globals. And then apply an EQ that contours best to this second set of guitars as we get in there. So I'm going to solo these guys. Alright, now here's the thing, I gotta be honest with you so you know. I like to record some deep gutted guitars. The problem with it is they tend to get in the way of the bass, so trying to find a sweet spot where we can do a high pass filter to kind of sweep out a little bit of the muddiness in the low end, and then maybe drop just a little bit of a shelf to kind of chill it out a little more, usually helps. So that we have kind of this overall kind of sound, but it's starting to gel with a little more uniformity. Now, it'll also begin to sound better if I turn it up, but because of the fact that it needs to brighten out, fulfill itself. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to write the rest of the list on the board. Actually, I think the only things you guys have to do left would be violin and viola. And violin and viola, I'm going to show those to you. They are down here at the bottom. We've already encountered these before, but into the bridge. These actually probably will need some balancing before you just jump in and start going crazy. Let me just show, I'll walk you through it because we're actually really close. So I'm going to start on violin. It looks like it ends over here, where it says VLN 411. So that'll be my new group. Shift Option. I'm going to add my new track. Stereo, violin, master, solo safe. Make a group. Call it violin.
You moved too fast.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, where did I lose it?
I can't never get that box to come up where you type in the name unless I'm not shifting option when you put a new track in, and then you have a window over to the side where you can type in the name. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, okay, so when you do this, you'll have to go Shift Option, Output, New Track.
I'll put on the first one.
Yeah, you can do it on any one of them as long as you're holding Shift and Option. You have the nameplates highlight. As long as the nameplates are highlighted and you're holding Shift and Option, you can do it on any one, and then just hit New Track, and then that's where this list comes in. Deselect where it says Create Next to Current Track, so that creates it down to the last track, and then you're gonna type in the name, whatever the master is that you're working on. Does that make sense? Once you've done that, then you can go ahead and solo save, so Command S, and then back up a stage. Let me know when you've done that. So then you'll hold Shift and select the last, not the violin master, but go back one. And it'll, notice how if I go forward or click back, it'll back up who's highlighted. If I'm holding Shift, if I hold Shift, it'll just keep adding or subtracting. So I want to only do the violins without the master. So as long as they're highlighted without the master, just hold Command G. So you'll just hit Command G and it'll make a group. With them highlighted, just hit Command G, it'll make a group, and then you can call it violin. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh wait, so the master didn't come up yet?
No.
Okay, so hold Shift Option. Yep, and then click the output. Yep. Yeah, there you go. Look. No, that's the in. So the lower one's the out. Yep, there you go.
This one.
No, the lower one.
This one.
Yep.
Okay. But it's not even.
Oh, that's weird. Maybe. Oh, that's weird. Here, do it again. See if you can do it again. So Shift Option. Yeah. Lower. There you go. Right there. That's really weird. Well, you're clicking this, right?
Yeah, right click it, right?
No, just left. You
That's
just
not
left
what
click
we're
it.
doing.
It's okay. You can redo it. Right click it again. And make out. Okay. There you go. Now you're good.
Okay.
There you go. Yeah. New track.
Okay.
And then you'll title it. This one's just violin M. So just put violin with a capital M. Once you guys have your violin master, you can move to make your viola master. You can start EQing. These might need a little bit of compression to smoothen them out. But they also need to be balanced individually track by track. So I'd go through these and go ahead and balance out their tracks overall. I'll play you mine in a second. Yes, sir.
To get my inbox working again real quick, should I close Pro Tools?
I would save it real quick.
Yeah.
Save it, and then how long did it go out?
Well, it hasn't been working this whole time. I've just been following along.
Oh, okay.
Violin,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Violin just did okay. And then you're gonna do the same thing for the violas.
Okay.
You know, highlight them the same way. The only can help you there, just because there might be a faster way. I just say for you to shut it down. Shut it down. Are you on your own hard drive again?
I'm working on the desktop.
Oh, really? Okay, let me do this. Is that you already checked it? It didn't show?
No, I'm working on the schools right now.
Oh, you are? Okay.
It's been playing through here, and even when I put in my headphones to have them on there, so computer screen.
No, it's not. No, it's not. But you're saying that you're on. You are on
the schools right.
Okay, that's fine. You'll remember where it's at.
Yeah.
Or close it. Okay. All I'm gonna do is shut these down and then instead of restarting Pro Tools, I'm just gonna kill these. What I want you to do is flip your hard drive on and off. Flip Pro Tools on and off. It's on that side. Flick it on and off. And yeah, just that side of the inbox. Flick it on and off, and then flip the school hard drive on and off. It's on the inside. Flip the school drive hard drive on and off.
Has it switched to?
Yeah, because even restarting Pro Tools won't get this back on if it's disengaged. There you go. And then back on for both, and then flick yours back on. There you go. And it should. And Pro Tools is still open, so should be able to get this to it.
What's wrong? Or consolidated, yeah, consolidated, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. All right. You guys are working on this. I'm gonna start doing mine just so I can show you what I'm doing here. I think this one I'll probably do a little compression on before.
Are you on the violin?
Yeah, on the violin. I'm just gonna balance them out and start to compress them and then give them an EQ sound so I can kind of work with them.
So what we're doing is we're balancing it out and then adding compression and EQ.
Yeah. And you probably want to, panning wise, you could probably still make panning adjustments because these are just kind of thrown out there. So you can still make panning adjustments to kind of fill it out some more.
Are we going back to the drums or are we just doing what you're doing right
No, you can do these right now because the next level of what happens after this is going through the drums like individually. I can kind of show you some of that, but once we hit our next break and we come back, we're going to focus on some of what's going to happen in the final exam.
now?
Just kind of have a conversation about that. I'm still going to go over some of this with you. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to have you work on some of this next week a little bit. So save this if you can. If you can save it somewhere or whatnot, we'll work on this a little bit next week. Just kind of give you a little more on what's going on with the mixdown, and then we'll do this. I'll have you guys turn this in as a project next week, but I'll walk you through it. I don't want to have you guys just going at it.
Yeah.
But I want to be able to walk you through it, and then we'll do our final exam, and we'll wrap it up.
Alright.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so. Is it not working?
It's saying there's a problem with the audio clock.
Alright, jump out, go ahead and save it, and jump out of it, quit it completely, and make sure that the little audio, this thing at the bottom, this little Digicore audio manager goes out when you restart it, because you're gonna just quit Pro Tools, make sure this Digicore audio manager is off. You might have to right click it and hit quit. Once it's done, go and reopen it. Reopen it from here in the dock, Pro Tools, and then open the session. See if that'll fix that clock problem. Did it fix it? Oh, you're probably gonna have to shut it down and reboot the whole thing then that really stinks that, oh, you know what, you might wanna do one more thing. Go to setup, are you still in?
Yeah.
Go to setup, go to session. See that it says 44.1?
Yeah.
It does?
Mhm.
But it won't, that's weird, I wonder why it won't sync it. Yeah, cause that's I think the only, why, oh, it won't let you toggle it, darn it. Oh, you know what, go to where it says clock source.
Ah.
Does it say internal?
It didn't say anything, but internal's enough.
Can you switch to internal and see if it'll take it?
No.
That's not good. Alright, I think you have to do a full reboot, unfortunately, because that's, man, that's normally the method to get that thing fired up.
Sure.
You can catch up, we're not really that far away from where you are. Alright, so I just went ahead and applied some compression with the violin. I'm going to go ahead and do some EQing to warm it up a little bit, because it kind of get the right sound from it. Here's how I always suggest EQing to go. If you're looking to add something my suggestion, if you want to add something typically, try a couple things, but the best way to do it is by taking the EQ curve into a tighter Q. So tighten the Q. If we want to add something, we'll tighten the Q. Bring it down. What you'll do is you'll sweep and you begin to hear where it's taken away, whatever it is you want to add. Like if you're like, I want to add warmth, and you go through and you cycle and you're like, ooh, warmth just went away when I did this. Then what you'll do is you'll find your sweet spot of where you want it because you just took it out. You'll add it inversely. You'll broaden your Q back out as wide as you can get it, but you're going to do it fairly mild like this. In the opposite fashion, if you want to get rid of something, tighten Q, boost, and find that crap. Once you find it, bring it back out. But don't do it. Do it mildly enough where it's not too much. You get what I'm saying? So you do the opposite effect to do the sweep. Instead of doing it, if you want to boost something, don't boost it and then sweep it, because you won't know the difference between essentially when you're boosting it and that's the specific spot you want it. Between that and essentially by boosting it, you're in a way taking away from something. Because sometimes you'll find that you wanted to boost something, but while you were sweeping and taking away, you're like, oh, you know what? Instead of boosting it all, let me just take this away and leave it just like this. Because by taking away, you essentially are boosting all the other frequencies. Does that make sense? Yes. Just.
Is it called Q to do that on every equalizer, and is it like
bandwidth is yes. It's bandwidth. Q is really just bandwidth. It's how much.
Okay.
You see how much it's affecting, even though I only picked one frequency.
Is it always going to turn in that fashion? I mean, because I know like different compressors look differently and they're labeled differently, and some of them don't always have the screen like that.
Well, I will tell you this: on hardware, it doesn't. Notice this only goes one direction. It doesn't go the other direction.
Right.
On hardware, it usually is a circular thing that goes all the way from the left range to all the way to the right range.
Right.
And the left range is typically, I've seen it done like this, where the leftmost is the smallest and the rightmost is the widest. That's how it is on the SSL. So it's opposite of this. But it shows, what it does is it shows the picture of this curve. It won't show this graph. It's just on the bottom of the knob, it shows it real small, and on the other side, it shows it real wide.
Okay.
And you won't get a visual, you're really just hearing it.
Right.
You know, so you won't get a visualization for it other than that.
Exactly. So
But yeah, it does exist. It's really popular.
But those are the three.
Yep, Q, frequency, and gain are really, really huge. There's some really cool consoles that they don't make anymore that, well, they make some of them. When I was in college, they had these consoles where all three of these knobs were stacked on one knob. So instead of wasting space on the board, like the SSL has all these individual knobs. They had some consoles where EQ was like a section this big, and it just had 4 knobs. And on each of those knobs were 3 knobs. Essentially, each knob had 3 knobs layered on top of each other. Really big one. The next level was in the middle, and then really tight. Tightest one was Q. The next one was gain. The lowest one was frequency. And you just went right down the knob. Really sick.
Nice.
They don't make those anymore. That's like a console from the 80s. But I thought it was amazing design because it utilizes so little space. The reason they don't use it anymore is because, you know, all the other knobs, instead of making that a big part, because it was essentially designed as a mixing board and monitoring board. Every other knob was channels 1 through 16 stereo aux outputs, which were all built so that you could have 16 stereo monitors on stage in stereo, so you had independent left-right channels, and you could rock like in-ears, left-right, you could do the whole gambit left-right. Well, they got rid of that whole format when they made digital consoles because they made that whole thing into a digital thing where you can just pick what number you want. They just put it on a single knob and they said, what channel do you want that knob to be? And you just cycle through it, 1 through 16, left, right, and you just, so it kind of made it obsolete, but that was really cool. Yes, these are so universal that they've been like that since the 80s, even before that probably. That's how they are now, that's how they are in the SSL.
For sure.
The only difference is, big thing, is that notice Q in the mid frequency when it's a peak notch is this, and Q when it's low pass, high pass is how fast it gets dropped down. And that's the only real difference. So but it is a big difference actually. But I mean, that's the only real difference. All right, I'm gonna play this. many of you were already done with this? Or kind of went through it already? Anybody?
I went through most of it.
Okay, let me catch up because I did not yet. I didn't get to the viola part. So new track,
I didn't get through.
master. Save, shift back. Boom. Love. Bring these guys in. Oh, another thing I forgot to mention that's really helpful, if you go to options and you switch out of pre-fader metering, then what you see with the meters will be a representation in pre-fader metering. What you see in the meters is how it was recorded, at the level it was recorded. If it's on pre-fader metering. With pre-fader metering off, that's the level that the fader allows the output to go at. Does that make sense? So when I switch out of pre-fader metering and I'm watching these guys go, I'm watching to see that they all match about the same level if I want to balance. So notice this one's lower than everybody else. You see how that worked? Pretty nice though to have the functionality of both, because pre-fader metering is great because when you track, you want to make sure that your fader's not affecting your output level, and if you clip, you'll see it very clearly. You know, and then of course in post, it's better to have it in post so you don't have to worry about that. Very easy. All right, most of you guys get through that section then, for the most part.
Yeah.
Bobby, you doing okay, buddy?
Just gotta figure out the guitar groups again.
Yes, sir. Did you have a question?
No, I'm just at the part where I was just leveling everything. It was only drum group, guitar group, violin group, and viola group, right?
Yes.
So you left off on.
I already did the violins and the
Okay, so you're gonna do this guitar. So this guitar. Yep. Yep.
Now, what's fantastic about this is once you guys understand how to do this in terms of the submixing, this is probably the most, realistically, this is probably the most complex the routing ever really gets in Pro Tools. You know, for the most part, this is the most complex it really gets. So if you understand this, then you just do this over and over and over again all day, you know, on obviously different mixes and different things. But if you can understand this, then you guys are doing really, really well. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you a couple of things about, overall, about the kit. And just kind of dial in a few things. We've actually talked about some of these specific things before. But I do want to highlight just a few things to kind of show you what can be done with some of these elements. So, Bobby, let me know when you get your second set of guitars. It's the S guitar through the last D guitar.
Okay.
Did you add all your color coding? Yeah? It's good. It's helpful.
Okay.
Oh, are you good?
Yeah.
Okay. What I wanted to show a little bit in terms of the drum world, and we haven't really started adding reverb to everything else yet, so this is still going to be kind of dry. But I wanted to kind of make a couple of things known on kick one. Let's go ahead and apply on kick one a compressor limiter dynamic 3. What I'm going to do with this, oh, actually, you know what? I'm sorry. I forgot I was going to, let's see, hold on a sec. Let me figure this out. Oh, okay, sorry. I'm going to go ahead and apply a gate first in this particular instance. So let's go to expand your gate dynamic 3 on the kick. And I just want to show you how I'm going to do this. The reason I'm going to choose to gate first is if I gate, I already have enough power in my kick, particularly because it's a kick. There's a large amount of, there's bleed in some of these mics, and we're going to eliminate that here. But the kick is dominant enough where it's so much louder than any of the bleed that we can gate it no problem and then compress it. The benefit to gating and then compressing is that if we gate and then compress, we can then only compress the things that go through the gate. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Which means instead, if we had compressed and then gated, we compress everything, and all the low volumes start to come up a little hotter, and they begin to be a problem in the gate. The other thing we could do is, this is a fantastic thing too, if you EQ after the compressor and the gate. Remember we talked about EQing after the compressor. You can EQ after the compressor and the gate. The only thing you EQ is, again, what goes through the gate. you'll see there's definitely a lot of reasons we might want to do that. One reason might be in the snare. If the highs in the snare are bleeding the hi-hat, we can kill the highs on the way into the compressor and kill some of the highs on the way into the gate. And once we get to the other side and it's just snare with no hat, we put the highs back. Basically, essentially, we get some of that room back. But let's start with this kick. So we're gonna go ahead and do this gate thing. What I want to do, I'm gonna break this down back to just my kit. So I'm gonna highlight my kit. Now, if you hit Control Solo, you'll get this kick by itself. What I want to have happen is have it nice and closed. Gain reduction shows when the gate's closed in this instance. I'm going to move it up so it's nice and solid. Now, notice what happens if I adjust the range. The range is the distance between essentially the points in between and then right when you're making that transition. So if we leave the range nice and low, it kind of keeps the bleed from cutting through. Now, Jason asked a valid question. He asked, why not have the attack go all fast? Now, for the gate's purpose, because it's a gate closed thing where the gate stays closed until the threshold's breached, the slower the attack, the more rounding we get of the attack of the ADSR. The faster the attack, again, the more clicking response we may get. So notice the attack's really kind of soft. Hear how my kick's kind of rounded? Hear the difference? So trying to find the right sweet spot so it's kind of somewhere not too punchy, but because the gate will make it punchier. Not too punchy, but also not too rounded. All right, let me know when you guys are done with that.
What did you do to get that line on the compressor to be so steep? Like how did you
Oh, range.
Range?
Was it on the compressor or the gate?
Oh, is that the gate?
Yeah, did you not pick a gate?
Nope.
Well, that'll change it.
What do I need to change if my gate is clipping?
Oh, see where it says in your EQ? See where it says output here, and it shows an out level? Bring that down until it stops peaking here. It should stop peaking in your gate. Now, one thing I want to point out, if you didn't know this about the gate has a hold feature, which is the length of how long the gate will be open. If you want it tighter, if you want a tighter sound, you'll go all left. If you want a slower, wider sound, you'll go all right. If you want in between, you'll just go in between. So you can't hear it a lot on the kick, but when we get to the snare, you will hear it. So I'm just going to pick something fairly moderate. All right, once you're done with that, we are going to add a compressor. So please go to Plug-in Dynamic Compressor Limiter. We're just going to give this enough compression. And I want to point out a few things. The attack's got to go fairly fast. The ratio can probably stay somewhere under 4. Make sure your gain reduction is not really giving you more than -4. So if you hit in and low filter and you sweep this in so some of the low end comes back in. How you guys doing? Hanging in there? Yeah? Now, I'm going to go ahead and show you the second kick and kind of what we can get out of it. The first kick you kind of hear has a distinct sound compared to the second. We just solo these. Notice the second kick has more pap kind of punch. If we want to utilize more of that, we can gate it, still compress more out of it. But what we want to do is when we do this, we want to do it with the blended purpose, so we want to, for the most part, we want to leave them both on. I'm going to go ahead and copy my plug-in of my gate and hope that it, for the most part, will match a lot more on my second kick. So I'm just going to hold Option and click it and drag it over into my second kick spot so it'll copy it. And then make just some fine adjustments to the gate first. Notice as I sweep my attack, it totally changes the overall sound. Bright punch, warm, kind of darken it up a little. Now once I got that kind of dialed in, I can jump in here. And I'm going to try to copy my compressor as well, but I'm going to make adjustments to it. So I'm going to click Option, click on the compressor, drag it over, and I'm just going to make some adjustments to this as well. guys hanging in there? Yeah?
Yeah.
Alright, now what I want to show you is on the snare, I actually had this original snare. There is already a gate and a compressor. The first snare you see. Let's see. And with my compressor settings, I really gave it a little more kind of a ringtone because of the way that the compressor's kind of sitting down on it. And then all I ended up doing from there essentially was gating it so I only get the snare through. And then what I get to do with this, if I try to hold it out longer, kind of sweep out what I don't like about this ring. Yes, sir.